Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. This content is provided strictly for educational and entertainment purposes only. The discussion regarding American television history, real estate practices, and the legal complexities of divorce does not constitute professional legal, financial, or real estate advice. Real estate laws and divorce proceedings vary significantly by state and jurisdiction. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with licensed professionals, including attorneys, tax advisors, and certified real estate experts, before making any decisions related to property sales or legal separations. In 1957, the average American family sat down in front of a glowing box to watch a vision of their own lives reflected back at them in the form of Leave It to Beaver. This was a world where the house was not just a structure of wood and nails, but the ultimate symbol of moral and social stability. Yet, fast forward to the modern era, and that same domestic sanctuary has become the most contentious asset in the American legal system. There is a staggering historical disconnect between the nuclear family dream manufactured by 20th century television and the high-stakes reality of the 21st century divorce real estate market. While we were being sold the white picket fence in 30-minute installments, a new and highly specialized professional was being forged in the fires of domestic litigation: the divorce real estate agent. This individual does not just sell homes. They liquidate the physical remains of a broken contract, often acting as a court-appointed neutral party in a scenario where the stakes are measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars and decades of emotional investment. In this deep dive masterclass, we are going to bridge the gap between the flickering images of the American dream and the cold, hard data of property division. You will learn how the evolution of television programming in the United States didn't just reflect our values. It actively shaped the real estate market and our psychological attachment to homeownership. More importantly, we are going to explore the specific, often hidden mechanics of how property is handled when a marriage dissolves in the modern age. We will examine the historical trends that led to the rise of no-fault divorce, and how that legislative shift created a desperate need for a real estate professional who understands more than just curb appeal. This is about solving the problem of the asset trap. The situation where the very home you worked your whole life for becomes a liability that can drain your bank account and your sanity during a legal separation. By the end of this series, you will understand the intersection of cultural history and modern real estate strategy, providing you with the framework to view the American home not as a sentimental anchor, but as a complex financial instrument. To understand the role of the modern divorce real estate agent, we must first look at the blueprint they are dismantling. Between 1946 and 1964, the United States underwent a housing boom that was unprecedented in human history. This boom was facilitated by the GI Bill and the Federal Housing Administration, but it was sold to the public through the medium of television. Early sitcoms like The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet or Father Knows Best were effectively long-form commercials for suburban life. These shows established the standard of living that every American was expected to achieve. The house was presented as a permanent fixture. In these scripts, the idea of selling the family home because of a marital split was practically non-existent. The narrative was one of accumulation and permanence. This cultural programming was so successful that it created a psychological sunk cost regarding homeownership that persists today. However, the reality behind the scenes was shifting. While television was busy reinforcing the image of the perfect home, the legal landscape was beginning to crack. For much of the early 20th century, getting a divorce in the United States required fault. One party had to prove adultery, cruelty, or abandonment. This meant that the family home rarely hit the market in a state of crisis. It was usually retained by the innocent party or handled through long, drawn-out settlement processes that didn't require a specialized real estate niche. But then came 1969. When California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the first no-fault divorce law, the floodgates opened. Historical trends show that divorce rates began to climb rapidly, and suddenly, the permanent family home became a liquid asset that needed to be moved quickly and neutrally. This is where the specialized divorce real estate agent enters the historical timeline. A standard real estate agent is trained to find the highest bidder and facilitate a smooth transition for a happy seller. But a divorce real estate agent operates in a high-conflict environment where the two sellers may not even be on speaking terms. Consider a case study from the mid-1980s, an era when the material girl culture was peaking and real estate values were soaring. In many high-asset divorces, the home became a weapon of leverage. One spouse might want to sell to liquidate their equity, while the other might want to stay to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children. A traditional agent caught in the middle of this often inadvertently aligns with one party, leading to legal delays, stale listings, and eventually, a lower sale price. The specialized agent had to develop a new set of skills: forensic valuation, court-ordered neutrality, and the ability to manage low communication sales. They are often called upon to be the special master or a court-appointed expert. Their job is to ensure that the property is sold for fair market value, regardless of the animosity between the owners. They must document every interaction to satisfy a judge and ensure that the title is cleared of any liens or spousal clouding that might occur during a bitter dispute. As television moved into the 1970s and 80s, the programming reflected this new, more fractured reality. Shows like One Day at a Time or The Brady Bunch began to explore the complexities of divorced or blended households. The dream home was no longer a static monument. It was a place of transition. This shift in media helped normalize the idea that a house could be sold, divided, and replaced. Yet, even as the culture changed, the financial stakes only got higher. By the 1990s and 2000s, the McMansion era led to homes with massive mortgages and complex financing. Selling a home during a divorce in 2005 was a vastly different beast than in 1955. It involved dealing with home equity lines of credit, HELOCs, underwater mortgages, and the tax implications of the Taxpayer Relief Act of 1997, which changed how capital gains on the sale of a primary residence were handled. The modern divorce real estate agent must be a master of these details. They need to understand the difference between separate property and community property, a distinction that varies by state and can mean the difference between a spouse walking away with half the equity or nothing at all. They must work alongside the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, CDFA, to ensure the timing of the sale doesn't trigger an unnecessary tax burden. This is the deep dive reality of the industry. It is not about staging a living room with fresh cookies. It is about managing a three-way communication stream between two opposing law firms and a neutral third party to ensure that the equity, often the largest single asset in a family's portfolio, is preserved. We must also consider the silver splitter trend, the rising rate of divorce among Americans over the age of 50. For this demographic, the home represents their entire retirement nest egg. The real estate agent in this scenario isn't just selling a house. They are managing the transition of a lifetime's worth of wealth. Television today, through reality-flipping shows and high-end real estate dramas, often glosses over these legal grinds. They show the glitz of the sale but rarely the 20 hours of depositions and title searches that precede a court-ordered liquidation. In the sections to follow, we will break down the exact step-by-step process used by top-tier agents to navigate these high-conflict sales. We will look at how to identify real estate fraud within a marriage, where one spouse might try to hide assets or devalue the home before a sale. We will analyze the historical data of the post-divorce housing market and how it impacts local economies. This is the history of the American home, not as a dream, but as a legal and financial reality that requires the precision of a surgeon and the neutrality of a judge. By understanding how we got here, from the scripted perfection of 1950s TV to the complex litigation of today, you will be equipped to handle the most difficult real estate transactions with clarity and professional distance. To understand the magnitude of the shift that occurred in the American psyche, we have to look at the transition from the curated living rooms of the 1950s to the volatile courtrooms of the 1970s. In the mid-20th century, television was more than entertainment. It was a manual for social architecture. Programs like The Donna Reed Show or Leave It to Beaver didn't just show a family in a house. They showed a family that was inseparable from the house. Historically, the home was seen as a permanent, non-negotiable anchor. If you were a real estate agent in 1955, your job was essentially to help a veteran and his wife move from an apartment into their first suburban development, likely a Levittown-style bungalow. The concept of a divorce real estate agent didn't exist because the social and legal barriers to exiting a marriage were nearly insurmountable. However, as we moved into the 1960s and early 70s, the economic and cultural landscape began to shift. The rise of the feminist movement and the subsequent economic independence of women meant that for the first time in American history, the domestic sphere was no longer a one-way street. When Ronald Reagan signed the No-Fault Divorce Act in California in 1969, he set off a chain reaction that would fundamentally change the United States housing market. Before this, you needed to prove a specific fault, adultery, abandonment, or cruelty, to break the marriage contract. Once no fault became the standard, the divorce rate spiked. Historical trends show that between 1960 and 1980, The divorce rate in the United States more than doubled. This created a massive immediate problem for the real estate industry. What happens when two people who own a single indivisible asset suddenly cannot stand to be in the same room? Imagine a scenario in 1978. Let us call our characters Robert and Linda. They bought a split-level home in a growing suburb of Atlanta in 1972 for $40,000. By 1978, the home is worth $75,000 due to the massive inflation of the era. But their marriage has dissolved. In a fault-based era, Robert might have kept the house if Linda was found at fault, or vice versa. But under the new no-fault laws and the emerging concept of equitable distribution, that $35,000 in equity became a battleground. This is the exact moment the need for a specialized professional was born. A standard real estate agent would walk into Robert and Linda's home and try to act as a dual agent, but they would quickly find themselves caught in a crossfire of emotional sabotage. Robert might refuse to sign the listing agreement because he wants to stay in the home. Linda might purposely leave the house in disarray for showings to spite Robert and prevent a sale. Fast forward to the current year 2026. The stakes have evolved from $40,000 suburban homes to multi-million-dollar digital and physical assets. Imagine a modern couple, Marcus and Sophia, living in a high-tech smart home in Austin, Texas. They purchased this home in 2021 during the peak of the low interest rate era, securing a mortgage at 3%. By 2026, the housing market has shifted. Interest rates for a new purchase are significantly higher, and the value of their home has fluctuated. They are now facing a divorce. This is where the specialized divorce real estate agent becomes a critical navigator. Marcus and Sophia are not just dealing with the sale of a house, they are dealing with the loss of a 3% interest rate that they may never see again. This is a case study in what we call the interest rate lock-in trap. If they sell the house and split the equity, neither can afford to buy a comparable home in the current 2026 market because their individual buying power has been slashed by higher rates and divided assets. A standard agent might suggest simply putting the house on the market, but a divorce specialist looks at the forensic reality. They must ask, is there a way for one spouse to buy out the other while keeping the existing mortgage? In 2026, this often involves complex negotiations regarding loan assumptions or equity buyouts that require precise valuations. The agent must remain a neutral third party, often communicating through two separate portals to ensure that neither Marcus nor Sophia feels the other is gaining an unfair advantage. If Marcus suspects the agent is favoring Sophia, he might refuse to sign the closing documents at the 11th hour, a common occurrence that can lead to a breach of contract and massive legal fees. To master this niche, one must understand the difference between a traditional sale and a court-mandated sale. In many 2026 divorce cases, the real estate agent is actually appointed by a judge as a special master. This means the agent doesn't just work for the sellers. They are an officer of the court. Their duty is to the asset itself, ensuring it is sold for the highest possible price to protect the financial interests of both parties, and often the welfare of any children involved. This role requires a deep understanding of legal terminology. For instance, the agent must be familiar with the lease pendens, which is a formal notice filed with the county recorder indicating that the property is subject to a pending lawsuit. A standard buyer in 2026 will see a lease pendens and immediately flee, fearing a clouded title. The divorce real estate agent knows how to work with the attorneys to have that notice lifted specifically for the sale, ensuring the property remains marketable. The historical data suggests that homes sold during a divorce often sit on the market longer and sell for less than homes sold under normal circumstances. Why? Because of spousal sabotage. This isn't just a plot point from an 80s movie like The War of the Roses. It is a daily reality in the real estate world. Sabotage can be subtle, like a spouse failing to mention a major plumbing issue to the agent, or overt, like a spouse refusing to leave the premises during a high-profile showing. The specialized agent uses a step-by-step mitigation strategy. First, they insist on a court order that dictates exactly how the home will be shown and who pays for repairs. Second, they utilize neutral third-party inspectors to document the home's condition before the listing goes live, preventing one spouse from claiming the other damaged the property out of spite. Furthermore, we must analyze the shift in how television has portrayed this reality. While the 1950s gave us the dream, the late 1990s and 2000s gave us the reality TV boom. Shows like Million Dollar Listing or Flip This House focused on the profit, but they rarely showed the grueling legal work required when the sellers are in the middle of a litigation battle. This media shift has created a dangerous expectation for the American public. People in 2026 often expect a fast, flashy sale, even when their legal situation is a tangled mess of liens and emotional baggage. The divorce real estate agent has to deprogram these expectations, moving the clients away from the reality TV version of real estate and back into the cold, hard facts of the legal system. In 2026, we also see the rise of the silver splitter demographic. These are individuals over the age of 50 who are divorcing after decades of marriage. For these sellers, the family home is often their only significant retirement asset. A mistake in the sale, such as failing to account for the Section 121 tax exclusion, which allows a single filer to exclude up to $250,000 of gain from their income, can be catastrophic. If the agent doesn't understand that the timing of the divorce decree versus the timing of the sale can change the tax liability from $500,000 for a married couple to $250,000 for a single person, they could potentially cost their clients tens of thousands of dollars in avoidable taxes. As we continue this deep dive, we have to look closer at the dark side of these transactions. What happens when the home isn't just an asset to be sold, but a vault where secrets are kept? We are talking about the hidden world of real estate fraud within the American marriage. How do spouses hide equity? How do they devalue a property on paper while maintaining its true worth? And most importantly, how can a specialized agent spot these red flags before the court gets involved? In the next part, we will explore the forensic tools of the trade and the shocking case studies of spousal sabotage that changed the way the U.S. legal system views the family home. The forensic investigation of a marital home in 2026 requires a level of scrutiny that would have been unimaginable to the real estate agents of the mid-20th century. In the era of black and white television, the value of a home was determined by simple metrics: square footage, the quality of the neighborhood, and the proximity to a school. Today, a divorce real estate agent must act as a digital archaeologist and a financial detective. We are moving into the realm of equity stripping and phantom liens, where one spouse attempts to artificially deflate the value of the property before the court-ordered appraisal. This is a sophisticated form of spousal sabotage that has evolved alongside the complexity of American financial systems. Imagine a case study involving a high-earning executive named David and his spouse, Sarah, in a 2026 suburban landscape like Charlotte, North Carolina. David, anticipating a divorce filing, decides to strip the equity from their primary residence. He does this by taking out a high-interest private loan from a business associate and securing it against the house. On paper, the home now has a massive debt attached to it, reducing the net equity that Sarah is entitled to share. A standard real estate agent would look at the title report, see the lien, and simply deduct it from the expected proceeds. A specialized divorce real estate agent, however, looks for the historical trends of the property's debt. They ask for the paper trail of that loan. Where did the money go? Was it used for home improvements, or did it disappear into a separate account? This forensic approach is the only way to uncover what the legal system calls a fraudulent transfer of assets. The forensic tools of the trade in 2026 extend into the physical structure of the home itself. Spousal sabotage is not always a paper trail. Sometimes it is a hammer and a hidden leak. In historical cases that have shaped modern real estate law, we have seen instances where a departing spouse deliberately causes internal damage that is invisible to a casual observer, but will fail a home inspection. Consider the 2026 case of a luxury property in Phoenix. One spouse, angry about the impending sale, turns the thermostat to 100 degrees and leaves the water running in a hidden crawlspace for days. By the time the agent brings a buyer through, the home has developed a mold issue that will cost $50,000 to remediate, effectively killing the sale and forcing a price drop that benefits the spouse who wants to buy the other out at a discount. This is why the specialized agent insists on a pre-listing inspection by a neutral party as the very first step in the process. This shift toward forensic real estate was mirrored in the evolution of American television drama. If the 1950s were about the sanctity of the home, the 1980s and 90s introduced the concept of the domestic thriller. Movies and shows began to depict the home not as a refuge, but as a site of strategic warfare. This cultural shift reflected the real-world statistical rise in contested property settlements. By the time we reached the 2020s, the public's understanding of real estate had been warped by reality TV, but the legal reality had become significantly more grim. In 2026, the divorce real estate agent must navigate the emotional fallout of these cultural depictions while sticking to the cold data. One of the most critical forensic steps is the analysis of utility and maintenance records. A specialized agent in 2026 will pull 3 years of utility bills for a property. Why? Because a sudden spike in water or electricity usage right before a divorce filing can indicate that a spouse is running a secret business out of the home, or perhaps they have installed high-value equipment that they intend to remove before the sale. In one notable case study, an agent discovered a spouse was mining cryptocurrency in a hidden basement compartment, using the marital home's electricity to generate a private asset while devaluing the home's electrical system. This is the level of depth required to protect the integrity of the marital estate. Furthermore, we must address the concept of the pocket listing sabotage. This occurs when one spouse colludes with a friendly real estate agent to keep the property off the multiple listing service or MLS. They claim they want a quiet, private sale to protect their privacy, but the actual goal is to limit the pool of buyers. By limiting exposure, they ensure the house sells for a lower price to a predetermined buyer, perhaps a shell company or a relative. The specialized divorce agent counters this by mandating full market exposure. In the legal framework of 2026, the goal is transparency. The agent must provide the court with a comprehensive marketing report showing exactly how many people saw the home, how many offers were received, and why the final offer was selected. The United States legal system has had to adapt to these tactics. In many states, the concept of waste or dissipation of assets is now a central part of divorce proceedings. If a spouse is found to have intentionally devalued a home through neglect or sabotage, the court can award a greater share of the remaining assets to the other spouse to compensate for the loss. The real estate agent's role is to provide the expert testimony that proves this dissipation occurred. They aren't just selling a house. They are providing the evidence that ensures a fair financial outcome. To understand the complexity of this, look at the step-by-step valuation process. In a normal sale, you look at comparables or comps. In a divorce sale, you must look at the date of separation value versus the current market value. If a divorce takes 2 years to litigate in the busy courts of 2026, the value of the home might change by 20%. Who gets that increase? If one spouse has been paying the mortgage and taxes during those 2 years while the other lived elsewhere, do they get a credit for those payments? These are the questions that a standard agent cannot answer. The divorce specialist must work with the attorneys to track every dollar spent on the property from the moment the petition was filed. The psychological component is equally forensic. The agent must be able to read the body language of the sellers during the initial walkthrough. If one spouse is overly eager to point out flaws, it is a red flag for potential devaluation tactics. If the other is silent and refuses to make eye contact, they may be planning to obstruct the closing process. By identifying these behaviors early, the agent can request the court to grant them sole signing authority for the listing agreement, a legal tool that prevents one spouse from holding the sale hostage. As we look at the historical trends, we see that the American home has transitioned from a symbol of unity to a complex puzzle of individual rights and liabilities. The television shows of our current era often focus on the renovation and the flip, but the true story of American real estate in 2026 is found in the quiet, methodical work of the divorce specialist. They are the ones who ensure that the equity built over a lifetime isn't dissolved by the heat of a broken relationship. But what happens when the sabotage isn't physical or financial? What happens when the home itself becomes a psychological prison for the children involved, and the real estate agent has to navigate the ethical minefield of selling a house while a family is in active crisis? In the next part, we will examine the impact of the 2026 interest rate environment on marital settlements, and why the old advice of sell the house and split the cash is now the most dangerous path a divorcing couple can take. We will dive into the specific math of mortgage assumptions and the rise of the divorce buyout specialist, a role that is redefining how the American dream is liquidated. The year 2026 has introduced a financial phenomenon that the television writers of the 20th century could never have scripted: the death of the easy pivot. In previous decades, the historical trend for a divorcing couple was straightforward. You put the house on the market, you split the equity down the middle, and you each took your half to put a down payment on a new, smaller residence. This was the era of mobility. But today, we are operating in a high interest rate environment that has effectively frozen the assets of millions of American families. If you are holding a mortgage originated in 2020 or 2021 at 2.5% or 3%, that mortgage is no longer just a debt, it is a high-value asset in its own right. Selling the house today means walking away from a monthly payment that might be half of what a new mortgage would cost for a home of lesser value. Imagine a scenario involving a couple in Denver. Let us call them Ethan and Maya. They bought their home in 2020 for $500,000 with a 3% interest rate. Their monthly principal and interest payment is roughly $2,100. Fast forward to 2026, and they are navigating a divorce. The home is now worth $750,000. Under the old rules, they would sell, pay off the $420,000 balance, and split the $330,000 profit. However, in the current market, if Ethan wants to buy a modest $400,000 condo at the current rate of 7%, his monthly payment for that smaller property would actually be higher than the payment for the $750,000 family home. This is the 2026 real estate math trap. It creates a situation where neither spouse can afford to leave, leading to what sociologists and real estate experts call bird nesting, where the parents rotate in and out of the home while the children stay put, simply because the cost of liquidating the primary asset is too high. This is where the divorce buyout specialist comes into play. This is a highly technical role that requires a deep understanding of mortgage servicing rules that most agents simply do not possess. One of the primary tools being used in 2026 is the mortgage assumption. Historically, most conventional loans were not assumable, meaning you couldn't just take over someone else's mortgage. But certain loan types, specifically FHA and VA loans, have remained assumable. If Ethan and Maya have a VA loan, Maya might be able to assume the entire 3% mortgage in her own name as part of the divorce settlement. However, there is a massive hurdle: equity. If the loan balance is $420,000 but the house is worth $750,000, Maya has to find a way to pay Ethan his $165,000 share of the equity without refinancing the main loan and losing that 3% rate. The step-by-step resolution to this often involves a second mortgage or an equity equalization from other assets. Maya might give Ethan her entire share of the 401k or other liquid investments to balance the scales so she can keep the house and the low-rate mortgage. The real estate agent must facilitate this by providing a certified divorce appraisal. This is not your standard market valuation. It is a forensic document that often survives cross-examination in court. It must account for deferred maintenance and the specific market volatility of 2026. If the agent overvalues the home, Maya cannot afford the buyout. If they undervalue it, Ethan loses his fair share of the marital estate. This high-stakes financial maneuvering is a far cry from the way divorce was handled in the television history of the 1970s. In shows like The Odd Couple or later in the 80s with Roseanne, the economic reality of the home was often played for laughs or depicted as a struggle of poverty. Today, the struggle is one of complex wealth management. The divorce real estate agent in 2026 must be fluent in the language of the IRS, particularly regarding the primary residence capital gains exclusion. Under current tax code, a married couple filing jointly can exclude $500,000 of gain from the sale of their home. If the divorce decree is finalized before the house is sold, that exclusion could drop to $250,000 per person. If the timing is wrong, a couple could inadvertently trigger a massive tax bill that wipes out a significant portion of their equity. Consider the case study of a couple in Silicon Valley. They bought a home for $1 million that is now worth $2.2 million. If they sell while still legally married, they could potentially shield $500,000 of that $1.2 million gain. But if they wait until after the ink is dry on the divorce and one spouse has moved out, they may lose a significant portion of that protection depending on how the ownership and use tests are met. The specialized agent doesn't just put a sign in the yard. They sit down with the couple's CPA and attorneys to map out a liquidation timeline. This is the difference between a professional who understands historical trends and an amateur who is just looking for a commission. Furthermore, we are seeing the rise of the ALT lien in 2026. This is a specific type of lien allowed in certain states that permits a divorcing spouse to tap into the home's equity to pay off the other spouse while maintaining the original mortgage's character. It is a technical maneuver that requires a specialized lender. If the agent doesn't know what an ALT lien is, they are doing a disservice to any client who wants to keep their home. The agent must coordinate with a lender who understands that this is not a cash-out refinance, which would trigger a rate hike to 2026 levels, but a specialized equity transfer. The psychological pressure of these 2026 transactions is immense. We have moved away from the 1950s ideal where the home was a sanctuary, through the 1990s where it was an investment vehicle, to today, where it is a fortress that many feel they cannot afford to leave. This creates a high-tension environment where the real estate agent often acts as a de facto mediator. They must manage the expectations of two people whose entire financial future is tied to a single set of closing documents. Case studies from this year show that the most successful outcomes occur when the agent implements a neutral communication protocol. This involves using shared digital platforms where all emails, documents, and showing feedback are visible to both spouses and their respective legal teams simultaneously. This eliminates the he said, she said dynamic that historically plagued divorce sales. By providing a transparent data stream, the agent reduces the opportunity for spousal sabotage and ensures that both parties are operating from the same set of facts. As we look at the evolution of the American home, we see that the dream has become significantly more expensive to maintain and even more expensive to dissolve. The divorce real estate agent of today is a product of this complexity, a specialist born out of necessity in a world where the 30-year fixed mortgage is the most valuable thing many people own. But what happens when the house isn't just a house? What happens when it is a historical property with deed restrictions, or a modern eco-home with complex leased solar arrays and smart grid obligations? The next layer of this masterclass involves the hidden liabilities of the 2026 home. We are going to look at the nightmare scenarios where a house sale is derailed by 21st century complications that didn't exist even 5 years ago. From solar panel leases that neither spouse wants to take over to the smart home ghosting, where a spouse maintains digital control of the locks and cameras after moving out. In the next part, we will dive into the tech-driven warfare of the modern divorce and how a specialized agent secures the digital perimeter of a listing. In the landscape of 2026, the concept of a home has transitioned from a physical structure of brick and mortar to a complex, interconnected digital ecosystem. When a marriage dissolves today, the divorce real estate agent is no longer just managing physical keys. They are managing a digital perimeter that is often being weaponized. In the mid-20th century, television shows like I Love Lucy portrayed domestic disputes as comedic misunderstandings involving a burnt dinner or a hidden shopping bag. But the historical trends of the 2020s have introduced a darker, more technologically advanced form of spousal interference, known as smart home ghosting. This occurs when one spouse, who has moved out of the property, retains administrative access to the home's smart infrastructure. They can remotely change the thermostat, blast music at 3 in the morning, or monitor the other spouse via integrated security cameras. Imagine a case study involving a property in a tech-heavy market like San Jose, California. Let us call the characters Olivia and James. James moves out, but because he was the one who originally set up the smart home network, he maintains the master login. As Olivia tries to prepare the home for a high-stakes showing with a potential buyer in the 2026 market, James remotely locks the front door via the smart deadbolt, preventing the real estate agent and the buyer from entering. Or worse, he uses the integrated smart speakers to interrupt the showing with loud, aggressive audio. A standard real estate agent might view this as a simple technical glitch. A specialized divorce real estate agent, however, recognizes this as a sophisticated form of asset devaluation and harassment. The first step-by-step protocol for a specialized agent in this scenario is the digital handover. Before the home is even listed, the agent insists on a professional tech sweep. This involves resetting the router to factory settings, revoking all third-party access to smart appliances, and ensuring that the login credentials for cameras, doorbells, and thermostats are transferred to a neutral, third-party management account or a new account controlled solely by the occupying spouse. This is a critical security measure to ensure the safety of the occupant and the integrity of the sales process. In 2026, failing to secure the digital perimeter can lead to a breach of privacy that could potentially result in legal action against the listing brokerage. This evolution of domestic warfare is a far cry from the analog sabotage seen in the television history of the 1980s. In that era, sabotage was physical, changing the locks or hiding the for sale sign. Today, the sabotage is invisible and wireless. Consider another 2026 scenario: the solar lease trap. Many American homes now feature extensive solar arrays, often financed through long-term power purchase agreements or leases. During a divorce, these leases become a massive point of contention. If the solar contract is in both names, but only one spouse is staying in the house, the transfer of that liability is a complex legal maneuver. If the house is being sold, many buyers in 2026 are wary of taking over a 20-year lease with high monthly payments. The divorce real estate agent must be an expert in these contracts, working with the solar provider to ensure that the lease can be either paid off from the proceeds of the sale or seamlessly transferred to the new owner without stalling the closing. Historical trends show that tech-integrated homes often sell at a premium, but during a divorce, that same tech can become a liability that drains the equity. The specialized agent uses a forensic tech audit to document the state of all smart devices. This is important because in several case studies from the early 2020s, departing spouses would rip out smart hubs, high-end thermostats, and even built-in home theater components, claiming they were personal property rather than fixtures. In the U.S. legal system, a fixture is generally defined as anything physically attached to the property. However, the definition of a digital fixture is still being debated in courts. Does the smart bridge that controls the lights count as a fixture? Does the doorbell camera? The divorce specialist clarifies these details in the initial listing agreement, preventing last-minute disputes that could derail a 2026 closing. Furthermore, we must analyze the role of surveillance in the 2026 real estate market. In a standard sale, it is common knowledge that buyers should assume they are being recorded by a nanny cam or a Ring doorbell. But in a divorce sale, the stakes are higher. One spouse might use the home surveillance system to record the other spouse's conversations with their attorney or the real estate agent. This is a potential violation of wiretapping laws in many states. The specialized agent's protocol includes a mandatory disclosure to both parties regarding the use of recording devices. They often suggest, and sometimes contractually require, that all internal cameras be disabled during the listing period to protect the legal privilege of both spouses. Television history has often glamorized the high-tech home, from the futuristic gadgets of the Jetsons to the automated mansions featured in modern luxury real estate shows. However, these shows rarely discuss the maintenance and liability of these systems during a legal separation. For example, what happens if the smart irrigation system fails and ruins the landscaping because the spouse who moved out canceled the subscription to the weather tracking app that controls it? This is another form of dissipation of assets. The divorce real estate agent must monitor these automated systems as closely as they monitor the physical structure. They ensure that all recurring subscriptions for home security, smart lawn care, and pool maintenance are kept current, often using a portion of the earnest money or a court-ordered maintenance fund. In 2026, we are also seeing the emergence of the virtual reality sabotage. Imagine a scenario where a disgruntled spouse purposefully messes with the home's digital twin. Many high-end listings now use 3D virtual tours as a primary marketing tool. If a spouse moves furniture, leaves trash, or creates an unsightly environment specifically when the 3D cameras are scheduled to arrive, they are effectively sabotaging the home's online presence. The specialized agent counters this by providing a professional staging team that is authorized by the court to enter and prepare the home, ensuring that the digital representation of the property is optimal, regardless of the occupant's emotional state. The complexity of these modern issues requires the agent to be more than just a salesperson. They are a project manager for a family's digital and physical transition. They must coordinate with cybersecurity experts, solar technicians, and legal counsel to ensure that every facet of the home's smart identity is accounted for. This level of detail is what separates a viral-ready professional from a traditional agent who is still operating on a 1995 playbook. As we move deeper into this masterclass, we have to recognize that the home is no longer just a place where you live. It is a data-generating asset that can either help or hinder your path to a fresh start. As we look toward the future of the American housing market, the intersection of tech and domestic law will only become more convoluted. The agents who thrive in this environment are those who can anticipate the next move in a digital chess match. But beyond the tech, there is the raw, emotional reality of the physical move itself. What happens to the items that aren't fixtures? What happens when the collection of vintage television memorabilia or the high-end appliances become the final sticking point in a multi-million-dollar deal? In the next part, we will explore the liquidation of the domestic interior. We will dive into the world of estate sales, personal property appraisals, and the psychological warfare over what stays and what goes. We will look at how the contents of a home can actually prevent the sale of the house itself, and the specific strategies used to clear the path for a successful 2026 closing. This is the stage where the physical and the emotional collide, and the real estate agent must become a master of logistics and empathy. The process of liquidating a domestic interior is where the sanitized version of real estate marketing crashes into the gritty reality of family law. In the history of American television, the transition of property was often depicted as a clean break. When a character moved out of a home in a 1970s dramedy, they were usually seen carrying a single suitcase or perhaps a box of records, leaving the house pristine for the next narrative arc. But in the 2026 real estate market, the contents of a home, known legally as personal property or chattels, can become a primary roadblock to the sale of the real property itself. A specialized divorce real estate agent knows that if you do not manage the furniture, the appliances, and the decades of accumulated clutter, the house will never reach the closing table. Imagine a high-stakes scenario in a suburb of Chicago. Let us look at the case study of Robert and Elena. Their home is a $1.5 million estate, but the interior is packed with a lifetime of high-value collections: rare books, vintage wine, and custom-made Italian furniture. The divorce has turned toxic, and neither party can agree on who gets the grandfather clock or the professional-grade espresso machine. While the house sits on the market, the interior remains a museum of their shared resentment. Prospective buyers in 2026, who are accustomed to the minimalist, move-in-ready aesthetic popularized by modern home staging television, walk into the house and feel the heavy emotional weight. They see the half-packed boxes and the dusty collections, and they immediately begin to wonder if the sellers are actually motivated or if the deal will collapse under the weight of a domestic dispute. The specialized agent employs a step-by-step strategy called the inventory separation protocol. This begins with a professional personal property appraiser. In a standard sale, an agent might just tell the clients to declutter. In a divorce sale, the agent works with the attorneys to mandate a neutral inventory. Every item over a certain dollar value, often $500, is photographed, logged, and valued. This is critical because it prevents the common occurrence of spousal theft, where one spouse removes high-value items before the home is shown, claiming they were gifts or separate property. By creating a court-admissible inventory, the agent ensures that the physical state of the home remains consistent from the listing date to the closing date. Furthermore, we must address the psychological warfare of the staging process. In the current 2026 market, staging is not just about making a room look pretty. It is about neutralizing the scent of a broken marriage. Historical trends in the U.S. housing market show that staged homes sell faster and for higher prices. But in a divorce, staging requires a court order. Why? Because if one spouse pays for the staging, the other may feel their equity is being used to benefit the spouse who is still living there. The agent must navigate this by proposing a staging escrow. This is a fund set aside from the future proceeds of the sale to pay for professional organizers, movers, and stagers. By using future money rather than current cash, the agent lowers the immediate barrier to cooperation. Consider the role of the estate sale in this process. When a 2026 home needs to be cleared, the agent often coordinates with a specialized liquidation firm. This is a far cry from a weekend yard sale. A professional liquidation involves an online auction platform that reaches thousands of buyers. This serves two purposes. It generates immediate cash to pay for the costs of the sale, such as repairs or deep cleaning, and it physically empties the house so that it can be marketed as a blank slate. If the house is empty, the emotional triggers are gone. A buyer can walk into a vacant, freshly painted living room and imagine their own life there, rather than being forced to witness the remnants of Robert and Elena's life. However, a new challenge has emerged in 2026: the disposal of digital property. We are seeing cases where a spouse refuses to leave the house until the smart appliances are disconnected from their personal accounts. If the high-end refrigerator has a built-in screen with the family's calendar and photos, that is now a privacy liability. The divorce real estate agent must ensure that all digital footprints are wiped from the physical hardware. This is a technical step that didn't exist in the era of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The agent brings in a tech clearing specialist to factory reset every appliance, from the oven to the laundry machines, ensuring that no personal data is transferred to the new buyer. The American legal system views the home as a container of value, but for the people living inside, it is a container of memories. This is where empathy meets logistics. The agent often finds themselves acting as a mediator for items of low financial value, but high sentimental importance. Case studies from 2026 show that a sale can be held up for weeks over something as trivial as a backyard swing set or a collection of holiday decorations. The agent's role is to keep the focus on the big picture, the hundreds of thousands of dollars in home equity. They use a technique called the trade-off matrix. For example, if Elena wants to keep the expensive dining table, she might agree to let Robert take the primary lead on selecting the landscaping crew for the presale curb appeal boost. By turning every emotional dispute into a business transaction, the agent moves the process forward. In the 2026 market, we are also seeing the rise of the deferred maintenance trap. During a divorce, neither spouse wants to spend money on a house they are about to leave. This leads to a rapid decline in the home's condition. A leaky faucet goes unfixed, the lawn dies, and the HVAC filters are never changed. This neglect shows up during the home inspection and gives the buyer immense leverage to demand a price reduction. The specialized agent counters this by establishing a maintenance ledger. They get both parties to agree that any necessary repairs will be paid out of the closing proceeds at a 1.5 times credit to the spouse who initially covers the cost. This financial incentive encourages the occupant to keep the home in top condition, protecting the asset for both sellers. The history of American television has moved from the crowded, multi-generational homes of the early sitcoms to the sleek, sterile environments of modern dramas. This reflects a shift in how we value space. In 2026, space is a luxury, and a cluttered home is seen as a dysfunctional home. The divorce real estate agent must be a master of the move. They coordinate with specialized moving companies that offer split shipment services, where one truck goes to spouse A's new apartment and the other goes to spouse B's rental, while the remaining items go to a donation center. This logistical precision is what prevents the closing from becoming a chaotic scene of moving vans and police interventions. As we conclude this part of the masterclass, we have to recognize that clearing the house is just the beginning of the end. Once the items are gone and the house is staged, the real battle begins: the appraisal. In a 2026 market that is highly volatile, the difference between one appraiser's opinion and another's can be a six-figure sum. This is where the legal and the financial truly lock horns. What happens when the court-ordered appraisal comes in lower than the debt on the house? What happens when one spouse disagrees with the valuation and demands a second opinion, stalling the sale for another 3 months? In the next part, we are going into the belly of the beast, the valuation war. We will look at the specific tactics used to challenge a home appraisal, the role of the BPO or broker price opinion in divorce court, and how to protect yourself from an underwater sale in a shifting economy. This is where the math gets cold and the strategies get aggressive. The valuation war in a 2026 divorce setting is not a simple disagreement over a number. It is a calculated battle of data points where the target is the judicial mind. In the early days of American television, property value was often a static background element. On a show like All in the Family, the Bunker household was a fixed entity, and its worth was rarely the focal point of the plot. But in 2026, the valuation of the primary residence is a dynamic, high-stakes metric that can shift by tens of thousands of dollars, based on which professional is holding the clipboard. When a marriage dissolves, the court requires a definitive value to determine equitable distribution. This is where the conflict between a standard appraisal, a broker price opinion or BPO, and a comparative market analysis or CMA creates a technical minefield that only a specialized divorce real estate agent can navigate. Imagine a scenario in a rapidly fluctuating market like Nashville, Tennessee. Let us look at the case study of a couple named Thomas and Jennifer. They own a modern farmhouse that they believe is worth approximately $900,000. Jennifer wants to buy Thomas out and keep the home for their children. Naturally, it is in Jennifer's financial interest for the valuation to be as low as possible to reduce the buyout amount. Thomas, conversely, wants the highest possible valuation to maximize his exit equity. In 2026, the court typically starts by ordering a uniform residential appraisal report. However, an appraiser is looking at historical data, what has already closed in the last 6 months. In a shifting economy, those 6-month-old comps might be completely irrelevant to the reality of today's interest rate environment. Thomas decides to challenge the appraisal. He hires his own appraiser, who finds a different set of comps, perhaps including a home 2 streets over that sold for a premium because it had a finished basement that Jennifer's house lacks. But the appraiser makes a heavy upward adjustment anyway. Now the court is faced with 2 conflicting professional opinions, one at $850,000 and one at $975,000. This $125,000 gap is what we call the valuation chasm. To bridge this, a specialized agent is often brought in to provide a broker price opinion. Unlike an appraiser, a broker looks at the active market, what is currently under contract and what is sitting on the market failing to sell. The BPO acts as the boots-on-the-ground reality check. It accounts for the smell of the neighbor's dog, the cracked sidewalk, and the fact that a similar house across the street just had a price drop. In the 2026 legal system, the BPO is increasingly used as the tiebreaker in the valuation war. The step-by-step strategy for managing this war involves the forensic review of comparables. A specialized agent doesn't just look at the sale price of a neighboring home. They look at the concessions. In 2026, Many sellers are paying for buyer interest rate buy-downs. If a house sold for $900,000 but the seller gave the buyer $20,000 in credits to lower their mortgage rate, the true value was $880,000. If the appraiser missed that credit, the valuation is artificially inflated. The divorce real estate agent digs into the private remarks of the MLS to find these hidden details, ensuring that the court has an accurate net value. This is a level of granularity that was unnecessary in the stable markets of the 1950s or even the early 2000s. Historical trends show that when the economy shifts, the first thing to go is the accuracy of automated valuation models or AVMs, like those found on popular consumer real estate websites. In 2026, these algorithms are notoriously unreliable for divorce cases because they cannot account for the condition of the interior or the specific legal encumbrances of a split household. Yet, many spouses come to the table armed with a screenshot of a website's estimate, treating it as gospel. The specialized agent has to deconstruct these numbers, explaining to the court and the clients why a computer-generated estimate cannot replace a forensic physical inspection. They must demonstrate how a 5% margin of error on $1 million home is $50,000, enough to fund 2 years of college tuition or a significant portion of a retirement fund. Furthermore, we must address the nightmare of the underwater sale. This occurs when the mortgage balance and the costs of sale exceed the current market value of the home. In 2026, with the correction in certain overvalued markets, this is a recurring case study. Imagine a couple who bought at the absolute peak in 2022 with a low down payment. By 2026, their home value has dipped by 10%, but after paying a 6% commission and closing costs, they are $40,000 short of being able to pay off the bank. In a divorce, this creates a toxic debt that neither spouse wants to touch. The specialized agent's role here is to facilitate a short sale or a deed in lieu of foreclosure, but with a divorce-specific twist. They must coordinate with the bank to ensure that the deficiency judgment, the remaining debt, doesn't fall solely on one spouse. They work with the attorneys to ensure the divorce decree specifies exactly how this negative equity will be shared, preventing one spouse from being haunted by a joint debt for a decade after the house is gone. The complexity increases when we consider the capital gains tax trap. Under U.S. tax law, the timing of the valuation and the subsequent sale can have massive implications. If an appraisal happens in January but the house doesn't sell until October, and the market has moved 5% in either direction, the original court order may no longer be equitable. The specialized agent advocates for a floating valuation clause in the settlement agreement. This allows the final payout to be adjusted based on the actual net proceeds of the sale, rather than a static number from an old appraisal. This protects both Jennifer and Thomas from the volatility of the 2026 market. Television history has often portrayed the battle for the house as a win-lose scenario. In the movie The War of the Roses, the house is destroyed because neither party will yield. In 2026, the divorce real estate agent's goal is to prevent that destruction by using the cold, hard logic of the BPO and the forensic appraisal. They act as the valve that releases the emotional pressure by refocusing the conversation on the data. They provide a defensible value, a number so well supported by evidence that it discourages further litigation. This saves the clients thousands in expert witness fees and months of court delays. The valuation war also extends to the add-ons. How do you value a home's smart grid integration, its specialized medical-grade air filtration system, or its deeded access to a private park? In 2026, these are not just perks, they are significant value drivers. The specialized agent must ensure the appraiser understands the replacement cost and the market demand for these features. If the appraiser treats a $50,000 solar plus battery system as a standard utility, they are missing a massive chunk of the marital estate. The agent provides the feature portfolio to the appraiser, documenting every high-value upgrade with receipts and performance data. As we move toward the final stages of the sale, the focus shifts from what the house is worth to how the house is perceived. The valuation is the skeleton, but the marketing is the skin. What happens when the valuation war is won, but the public perception of the home is tarnished by the divorce itself? How do you sell a house that the entire neighborhood knows is the site of a bitter legal battle? In the next part, we will explore the stigma of the split, the psychological impact of a divorce on a property's marketability, and the clandestine marketing strategies used to protect the privacy of high-profile sellers while still driving a bidding war in 2026. This is where the real estate agent becomes a public relations expert and a master of the quiet luxury sale. In the high-stakes environment of 2026, the marketing of a marital home is no longer just about exposure. It is about narrative control. Historically, the American public has been fascinated by the domestic lives of others, a trend fueled by decades of television history that moved from the scripted perfection of I Love Lucy to the intrusive, unscripted reality of Bravo's real estate franchises. This cultural shift has created a double-edged sword for the divorce real estate agent. While high visibility can drive up a price, the stigma of the split can just as easily devalue a property. If the market senses desperation, the lowball offers begin to flood in. In 2026, a house is not just a structure. It is a story. If that story is one of a crumbling marriage and a court-ordered fire sale, the potential outcomes for the sellers are significantly diminished. Consider a case study from the affluent hills of Los Angeles. Let us look at the situation of a high-profile couple, Alexander and Chloe. Their home is a masterpiece of modern architecture, valued at $5.5 million. The neighborhood is tight-knit, and news of their separation has already leaked into local social circles. In a standard real estate scenario, an agent would put a large sign in the yard and hold a lavish open house. But for Alexander and Chloe, this would be a catastrophic mistake. A sign in the yard becomes a beacon for divorce vultures, investors and opportunistic buyers who believe they can squeeze a desperate seller for a 20% discount. The specialized divorce real estate agent employs a strategy known as the stealth listing or the quiet luxury sale. This involves bypassing the traditional public-facing portals like Zillow or Redfin in the initial stages. Instead, the agent utilizes a private network of vetted brokers and high-net-worth buyers. In 2026, this is managed through encrypted off-market platforms where the property is presented as a discrete transition. By removing the public for sale sign and the active status on the MLS, the agent preserves the home's prestige. They create an aura of exclusivity rather than an aura of crisis. This allows Alexander and Chloe to maintain their privacy, while the agent selectively brings through buyers who are looking for a unique asset, not a legal casualty. The step-by-step detail of a quiet luxury marketing plan is rigorous. First, the agent implements a non-disclosure agreement or NDA requirement for any buyer who wants to see the full digital twin or floor plans of the home. This prevents the interior photos from being splashed across social media, which could further complicate the legal proceedings. Second, the agent controls the showings calendar with absolute precision. In a divorce, you cannot have a lockbox on the door where any agent can walk in at any time. This would lead to spousal sabotage or the accidental disclosure of sensitive legal documents left on a desk. The agent or a trusted associate is present for every single showing, acting as the buffer. They are trained to deflect questions about why are they moving, with a practiced, neutral response. The sellers are moving toward a new chapter, and they have requested that we focus exclusively on the merits of the property. This level of public relations management was entirely absent from the television depictions of the 1950s and 60s, where the neighborhood gossip was the most significant threat to a family's reputation. Today, the threat is global and digital. Historical trends in the U.S. housing market show that properties associated with high-conflict litigation sit on the market 30% longer than neutral listings. To combat this, the specialized agent uses neutral staging. This involves more than just removing family photos. It involves a lifestyle reset. If the home was a masculine man cave or a feminine shabby chic sanctuary, the stagers bring in a high-end gender-neutral palette. They remove the traces of the two separate lives being lived under one roof. In 2026, successful staging makes the house look like it was never lived in by a couple in crisis, but rather curated by a professional designer for a sophisticated, singular owner. Another critical component of the 2026 strategy is the digital perimeter audit. Before a single buyer walks through, the agent ensures that all smart devices are in seller mode. This means the smart speakers are disabled, the doorbell cameras are not recording audio of the buyer's conversations, and the family's shared digital calendars are wiped from the kitchen's smart hub. If a buyer hears a spouse arguing over a speaker or sees a court date on a kitchen screen, the negotiation leverage shifts instantly. The agent acts as the digital janitor, sweeping the home of these high-tech vulnerabilities. Imagine if scenario where this protocol is ignored. A buyer walks through a beautiful 2026 suburban home in North Texas. While in the primary bedroom, they notice two separate closets that have been clearly divided with post-it notes indicating which items belong to whom. They see a notice of deposition sitting on the nightstand. Subconsciously, the buyer stops looking at the crown molding and starts looking at the cracks in the marriage. They realize the sellers are in a hurry. When they submit their offer, they don't offer the $1.2 million asking price. They offer $1.05 million, with a 10-day closing period, knowing that the sellers are likely desperate to stop the bleeding of their legal fees. This is the transparency tax, and it is the job of the divorce real estate professional to ensure their clients never have to pay it. Furthermore, we must look at the social media blackout clause. In 2026, the agent often requires both spouses to sign a contract stating they will not post about the sale of the house on their personal social media accounts. A single angry post about a failed dream home can be traced back to the property by a savvy buyer's agent. This is the modern version of disparagement, and it can kill a bidding war before it begins. The specialized agent monitors local geotags and hashtags to ensure that the digital story of the home remains pristine. As we examine the historical data of the 2020s, we see the rise of the targeted buyer persona. The agent doesn't just market to everyone. For a divorce sale, they might specifically target corporate relocation departments or silver splitters, who are also looking for a fresh start. These buyers are often less concerned with the why of the sale and more concerned with the what, the quality of the asset and the speed of the transaction. By aligning the marketing with buyers who are also in transition, the agent creates a psychological bridge that facilitates a smoother closing. The history of American television has brought us to a point where we expect to see the behind the scenes of everything. But in the world of high-stakes divorce real estate, the most successful agents are the ones who keep the behind the scenes exactly where they belong, behind the scenes. They understand that a home's value is 50% math and 50% perception. If you lose the perception battle, the math will never work in your favor. But what happens when the marketing works too well? What happens when you get multiple offers, but the two spouses cannot agree on which one to take? What if one spouse wants the highest price with a long closing, but the other wants a lower price just to be done with the process immediately? In the next part, we will explore the closing room warfare, the final, grueling stage of the transaction where the real estate agent must navigate the dual signature trap, and the role of the court-ordered sale when communication completely breaks down. This is where the deal either lives or dies on the tip of a pen. The closing room warfare of 2026 is the final crucible where the financial strategy of a divorce real estate transaction meets the hard reality of legal finality. In the mid-20th century, the act of signing a closing document was often depicted on television as a joyous milestone, a rite of passage for the nuclear family entering their suburban dream. But as the American family structure shifted through the decades, from the stability of the 1950s to the complex, multi-household realities of the 2020s, the closing room has transformed into a high-stakes arena of the dual signature trap. This trap occurs when the real estate agent has successfully marketed the home, secured a high-value offer, and navigated the inspections, only to have the entire deal held hostage because one spouse refuses to sign the final deed out of a desire for leverage or simple emotional retribution. Imagine a case study in Seattle, Washington. Let us look at the situation of Michael and Sarah. They are selling their high-end craftsman home for $1.8 million. The market in 2026 is sensitive to timing. Interest rates are fluctuating, and the buyer has a mortgage commitment that expires in 48 hours. The buyer's offer is the highest the property has seen in 6 months. Michael is eager to sign. He has already put a deposit on a new apartment. However, Sarah, feeling that the overall divorce settlement is unfair regarding other assets like Michael's stock options, decides to withhold her signature from the closing documents. She knows that if the deal collapses, Michael loses his deposit on the apartment, and the household continues to bleed carrying costs. This is the ultimate moment of spousal sabotage, and for a standard agent it is a catastrophic dead end. The specialized divorce real estate agent, however, anticipates this move through a step-by-step protocol known as the court-appointed sales mandate. Before the house even hits the market, the professional agent works with the attorneys to ensure the divorce decree, or a stipulated order, includes a clause for specific performance. This legal tool grants the agent or a neutral third party the authority to sign on behalf of a non-cooperative spouse if certain conditions are met, such as the offer being within a specific percentage of the appraised value. In 2026, we are seeing a historical trend where judges are increasingly willing to sign a Section 121 order, which effectively removes the power of veto from the disgruntled spouse and places the power of the sale in the hands of the court-appointed expert. The role of the agent in this environment is less about salesmanship and more about forensic documentation. Every interaction with Michael and Sarah must be logged. If Sarah claims she didn't receive the closing disclosure, the agent must be able to produce a digital receipt showing exactly when the document was opened. In the 2026 legal system, data is the only defense against a spousal breach of contract. The agent uses a secure, three-way communication portal where all parties, including the respective attorneys and the title company, can see the progress of the paperwork in real time. This transparency makes it much harder for one party to forget a deadline or claim ignorance of the terms. Consider the imagine-if scenario where the dual signature trap is triggered without a court mandate. The buyer, frustrated by the delay, pulls their offer. Because the market has shifted slightly, the next best offer is $100,000 lower. Under the laws of equitable distribution in many U.S. states, the spouse who blocked the sale can be held liable for the waste of assets. The specialized agent provides the expert testimony and the paper trail required for the court to subtract that $100,000 loss directly from Sarah's share of the proceeds. This is the cold, hard math of the 2026 real estate market. The agent isn't just a facilitator. They are a guardian of the equity, ensuring that emotional volatility doesn't lead to financial ruin for the entire family unit. Historical trends show that the closing table itself has become a relic of the past. In 2026, almost all divorce-related closings are handled through split signings. The two spouses never enter the same room. They may not even be in the same state. The agent coordinates with mobile notaries to visit Michael and Sarah separately. This is a critical psychological strategy. By removing the physical presence of the adversary, the agent reduces the likelihood of a last-minute emotional outburst that could derail the signing. The focus remains on the professional nature of the transaction. Another significant challenge in the 2026 closing room is the net sheet dispute. A net sheet is a document that shows exactly how much cash each spouse will receive after the mortgage is paid, commissions are deducted, and taxes are settled. In a divorce, this net sheet must be perfectly aligned with the divorce decree. If the decree says the husband pays 60% of the credit card debt out of the house proceeds, but the wife's attorney argues the debt was incurred after the date of separation, the closing can stall. The specialized agent doesn't wait until the day of closing to solve this. They provide preliminary net sheets to both legal teams weeks in advance, forcing the attorneys to litigate the math before the buyer's earnest money is at risk. This level of detail is a massive departure from the television history of the 1980s or 90s, where the financial aftermath of a divorce was often brushed over in a single line of dialogue about selling the house. Today, the masterclass level of real estate involves understanding the owlty of partition. This is a specialized deed used in 2026 for buyouts. If Sarah wanted to keep the house and pay Michael his share, she wouldn't just buy it. She would use an owlty lien, which allows her to borrow against the equity to pay Michael while treating the loan as a purchase money mortgage for tax and interest rate purposes. If the agent doesn't understand these instruments, the closing will fail because the financing will be rejected by the underwriters. As we examine the case studies of 2026, we see the rise of the post-closing occupancy battle. This occurs when the house is sold, the signatures are secured, but one spouse refuses to move out. They have ghosted the move-out date. The specialized agent manages this by suggesting a holdback escrow. A significant portion of the defiant spouse's proceeds, perhaps $20,000 to $50,000, is held by the title company and only released once the buyer confirms the property is vacant and in the agreed-upon condition. This financial carrot-and-stick approach is the most effective way to ensure a smooth transition in a high-conflict scenario. Television has taught us that the end of a story is usually a clean break. But in American real estate history, the closing is just the beginning of a new financial reality. The agent's job is to ensure that when the part 10 of the client's life begins, they are not anchored to the ghosts of their past. We have explored the history, the tech sabotage, the valuation wars, and the closing room traps. But there is one final overarching question that defines the entire industry in 2026. How do you rebuild? What happens to the American dream once it has been liquidated? In the final part of this masterclass, we will look at the post-divorce reentry. We will analyze the data on how soon silver splitters and younger couples re-enter the housing market, the impact of divorce-induced renting on the 2026 economy, and the final checklist for every American who finds themselves standing in front of a house that is no longer a home. This is the blueprint for the aftermath, where we look at the potential outcomes of a life redesigned. The final stage of the divorce real estate journey in 2026 is not simply the distribution of a check. It is the strategic repositioning of an individual's entire economic identity. When the dust settles and the moving trucks depart, the American consumer is faced with a landscape that has been fundamentally altered. Historically, the post-divorce phase was viewed as a period of decline. In the television narratives of the late 20th century, the divorced character was often depicted moving into a drab apartment, a visual metaphor for their reduced social and financial status. However, the 2026 reality is one of calculated reconstruction. The rise of the divorce real estate agent has created a new historical trend where the liquidation of the marital home serves as the seed capital for two separate, potentially robust financial futures. This is the blueprint for the post-divorce reentry. Consider a case study from the current year, 2026, involving a professional named Catherine in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. After the sale of the family estate, Catherine walks away with $400,000 in net equity. In the 1990s, she might have rushed to buy a smaller house immediately. But in the 2026 market, with high interest rates and low inventory, Catherine's specialized agent provides her with a transition strategy. This involves a period of tactical renting. By placing her $400,000 into a high-yield liquid account or a diversified portfolio, she maintains her mobility while waiting for a market correction or a specific neighborhood opportunity. This shift from immediate ownership to strategic waiting is a hallmark of the modern era. One of the most significant historical trends we are seeing in 2026 is the emergence of the silver splitter solo buyer market. Data suggests that Americans over 50 are the fastest-growing segment of single-person households. For these individuals, the goal is often right-sizing. They are looking for low-maintenance, high-tech luxury condos or age-restricted communities that offer a social ecosystem. The divorce real estate agent's job doesn't end at the closing table of the marital home. It continues as they act as a consultant for this reentry. They help the client evaluate the carrying costs of a new property against their now solo retirement projections. They look at the step-by-step math of property taxes and HOA fees, which in 2026 have risen significantly due to increased insurance premiums and labor costs. Imagine if scenario where the financial reentry is botched. Let us call him David. David is 55 and in his haste to prove he is doing fine, he buys a new bachelor pad in a trendy district of Miami just months after his divorce is finalized. He pays $800,000 at a 7% interest rate. Because he didn't wait for his credit score to recover from the joint debt hits during the divorce litigation, he is paying a premium on his mortgage. Within 18 months, the maintenance on the luxury building spikes, and David finds himself house poor for the second time in a decade. This case study highlights the importance of the cooling-off period, recommended by specialists. Historical trends indicate that those who wait 12 to 24 months after a divorce to purchase a new primary residence have significantly higher long-term financial stability. The psychological impact of this reentry is also heavily influenced by our media environment. In 2026, social media and reality television continue to push the narrative of the revenge house, a property bought specifically to signal one's success post-split. The professional scriptwriter for this reality must emphasize that the most successful revenge is actually a sound balance sheet. The real estate agent's final checklist for the client includes a credit repair phase. During a divorce, even the most amicable ones, joint accounts can lead to missed payments or high utilization that tanks a credit score. The agent directs the client to specialized credit counselors who understand the nuances of marital debt division. This ensures that when the client is ready to re-enter the market, they can qualify for the most competitive rates available in 2026. Furthermore, we must look at the rise of divorce-induced renting as a permanent lifestyle choice for a portion of the population. In many high-cost-of-living areas, the math of 2026 suggests that renting and investing the home equity in the market yields a better long-term potential outcome than re-entering a high-interest mortgage. This is a radical departure from the mid-century ownership at all costs ideology seen in 1950s television. The divorce real estate agent acts as a wealth strategist here, coordinating with the client's financial advisor to determine if homeownership still fits the client's new, solo life goals. Another critical step-by-step element of the blueprint is the estate plan reset. In the aftermath of a house sale, many individuals forget that their old will, their life insurance beneficiaries, and their power of attorney documents still list their ex-spouse. In 2026, where digital assets and real estate are often intertwined, Failing to update these documents can lead to a legal nightmare if the client passes away shortly after the divorce. The real estate professional ensures that the client is handed off to an estate attorney the moment the closing is complete. The historical data of the 2020s shows that the American dream is being redesigned into something more flexible. The nuclear family home was a fixed point. The post-divorce home is a variable. We see the rise of co-living among divorce professionals, where 2 or 3 solo divorcees purchase a large property together to share costs and maintain a high standard of living. This is the 2026 version of the Golden Girls, but with a forensic legal structure. The real estate agent must draft co-ownership agreements that specify exit strategies, maintenance responsibilities, and what happens if one person wants to sell. This is the high-level complexity that defines the current market. As we conclude this deep dive masterclass, we have to look back at the journey. We started with the flickering images of 1950s sitcoms, where the home was a static monument to a perfect life. We navigated the 1970s rise of no-fault laws, the 1980s and 90s obsession with equity as a weapon, and the 2026 reality of tech sabotage and interest rate traps. The American home has been transformed from a sanctuary into a sophisticated financial instrument that requires an expert to operate, especially when it is being dismantled. The role of the divorce real estate agent is now a permanent fixture of the U.S. economy. They are the navigators of the most difficult transitions in a person's life. They bridge the gap between the law, the market, and the human heart. For anyone standing in front of a house that is no longer a home, the message is one of objective reality. The asset can be liquidated, the equity can be preserved, and the future can be redesigned with precision. While the sale of the house marks the end of a chapter, the management of that transition determines the quality of the next book. The historical trends are clear. Those who treat the sale of their marital home as a cold, data-driven business transaction, supported by specialized professionals, are the ones who thrive in the aftermath. The dream isn't over. It has just been subdivided. As the 2026 housing market continues to evolve, the lessons of this masterclass remain the foundation for anyone looking to turn a domestic crisis into a financial fresh start. But as one cycle ends, another begins. What happens when these new solo buyers and co-living groups start to influence the architectural design of American homes? How will the housing stock of the 2030s reflect the lessons learned from the great divorce boom of 2026? In our next series, we will explore the architecture of autonomy, how the rise of the single-person household is literally changing the floor plans of the United States.